Welcome to The Dad Lawyer, a program produced by the Parents Estate Planning Law Firm in conjunction with ActonTV. I'm your host, David Feakes, founder of the Parents Estate Planning Law Firm in Acton. The Dad Lawyer is a program for parents with young children and highlights the legal and financial issues that are specific to parents and growing families in Acton and the surrounding communities. Today I'm joined by Ellen Waldorf, who's the owner of Waldorf Mediation in Newton, Mass. Welcome, Ellen, to The Dad Lawyer.
Thank you for including me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your educational background, and a little bit about your firm.
Sure. So I'm from suburban Boston. That's where I grew up, and I went away to college. And before going to law school, I did a bunch of things, including working for a nonprofit where I helped with the board meetings and realized I wanted to become a lawyer from that experience. So I went to law school in New York and then went off to clerk for a year for a judge in Colorado before working as a corporate lawyer in Washington, D.C. for 5 years. And when I moved back to the Boston area in 2000, I accidentally fell into mediation. I met a woman named Diane Newman who was early on into divorce mediation in Massachusetts, and she was looking for part-time mediators at the time and basically brought me into the profession. She closed her office in 2015, and that's when I started my own practice in Newton, focusing on all sorts of family mediation. But the bulk of my work is marriage related, so divorce mediation, helping families with prenuptial agreements when they're creating families, and also helping people who want to stay married create marital agreements. But they all, and then I also have grown my practice to include intergenerational issues that adult children and their parents are dealing with around aging or estates as well.
What is it about mediation that attracted you to it initially?
I don't think I knew about mediation until I took a class in law school called Alternative Dispute Resolution. Now we don't think of these processes as alternative, but dispute resolution. And that's where I was introduced to mediation. I mean, the whole reason I went to law school was I liked problem solving. And mediation really is about problem solving. It's really a process, it's a voluntary process where people problem solve with the help of a neutral mediator. And my role is a neutral, I'm a facilitator, and I help people solve their problems, and I get to do the problem solving I love every day.
So for people, you started to talk about it right there, but for people who really don't understand what mediation is, what it's about, and what the process looks like, talk a little bit about that. So
mediation really was meant to deal with getting people out of courts and out of lawsuits by essentially having the people who were in conflict having a conversation. And the role of a mediator is to facilitate that conversation. Mediation's voluntary, so people do not have to participate in the conversation. They can also end the conversation at a point if they feel the conversation is not helpful. The idea of having a neutral is to help people hear one another. So, my role is really to draw out what people want to say and what underlies their concerns, and to help them understand options and make choices that are right for them. It's also a confidential process. So in other words, if for some reason it is a conflict that started in the court, if it needs to go back to the court, what got discussed in mediation can't be brought in. So people can't be forced to testify to say, gosh, you know, this is the settlement talks that we were having, because the idea is to create a safe place for people to have a conversation without the logistics and all the parrying of litigation, which sometimes gets expensive and sometimes it's not really the focus of what the people that are in conflict are concerned about.
So I suspect that in mediation there's different kinds of lawyers, there's different kinds of mediators and different approaches to mediation. What is your firm's approach to mediation, and how is that, if it is, different from other mediators?
So my approach is very much a facilitative approach. When I work with people, I have a few things that I want to make sure happens. First of all, I want to make sure that they have all the information that they need to make informed decisions, because I'm not only concerned with people making choices at the time that they're meeting in mediation, but I want them to be able to live with the solutions that they've created over time. And you can't make decisions thoughtfully and that you feel bound by unless you have all the information. So the first thing I want to make sure that everybody has is all the information that they need to make an informed choice. I also want to make sure that they understand options. So when I say my approach is facilitative, when I work with divorcing clients, I want them to understand that there's not just one absolute way of getting, resolving their divorce. I think sometimes people have a misconception. They might say, this is what I'm entitled to. There are some mediators that will tell you, if I were the judge, this is how I would rule. I do want people to understand how different lawyers for each spouse would approach the case and what they would ask a judge to do. But as we lawyers know, there's not a guaranteed outcome. Each judge might look at a family in a different way. Instead of families thinking about just, how would Judge A look at our situation, I want people to recognize that there's a larger range of what's reasonable and have them figure out where on the continuum they're better off being. So I do a lot of reality checking, but I want them to understand those options. And I also want to facilitate their conversation. So for some people, they sit in my office at the same table at the same time, and we talk through these things together. Other couples, it's just too difficult to sit in the same room. Sometimes it's raised voices, but sometimes one spouse has really done a lot of thinking, or their problem-solving style is that they really can process information quickly, and whereas the other spouse is kind of just floundering and not really sure. And so I also, part of my facilitative approach is providing people, the level of service that they need. The people who need a lot of hand-holding, I'm going to give a lot of hand-holding to. But I also work with a lot of people where the heat and the distress of the divorce, it's not that it's gone away, but it's not at its highest level of intensity, and so that they are able to do a lot of work themselves, but again, they don't know they've never done this before. So what is it that we need to do and we need to be thinking about? And those people don't need as much time. Because I'm a lawyer as well, and my practice is focused on mediation, it also allows me to write the documents that go to court. No matter how people get divorced, they must submit their divorce for review to the court for approval. I think that's the other thing that people don't often realize, is that a lot of people think, oh, we can agree, and therefore whatever we agree to is that will be approved. And that's not true. People need to have something that's within a range of reasonableness, that a judge feels that this is appropriate, and the legal term is equitable, that it's fair for them under their unique circumstances. And so part of my role is not only helping them think about and reality test and understand the context in which they're making decisions, but make sure it really is something that's going to pass muster with a judge, so they don't have to start at the ground level.
And in terms of costs, how are your fees structured?
Well, and as we talked about the range of mediators, I mean, the way that I work, there are some mediators who take the lawyer model and charge a retainer, which gets refilled as the money gets spent. I instead charge people by the hour, because I've had people, when I think about how much time it takes, I've had people who've taken less than 10 hours of time, and in one really intense case, it took over 300 hours of my time, and that was just the build time. So that's why mediation tends not to be a flat rate service like, real estate transactions, when buying and selling a house. So and again, because most people don't budget for divorce, that is something that we talk about as well within the context of the mediation. And people also can space out the timing of the mediation. Because it's a voluntary process, people don't automatically come to my office every week or once every other week. So people often do it in fits and starts. And that's another way that they kind of manage the costs, is to meet and move forward when they are ready to have those conversations, or they've gathered the information they need.
So if a prospective couple was coming to you for the first time, what would they expect as they were meeting with you for the first time?
Sure. I mean, there are two things. I and there are other mediators who do this too. Always am glad to meet with people for a brief period of time to talk about mediation and divorce and my approach. Because I feel like with all things, there are a lot of good lawyers, there are a lot of good mediators, but it's also, there's a little bit of chemistry. I mean, when I'm working with families, I'm working some of the most sensitive things in their lives. Some people are an open book and everybody knows about what's going on, but a lot of people are very private. And so I feel it's important that people choose a professional that they feel comfortable with, because if they don't feel comfortable, they're just spinning their wheels. And I'm always glad to meet with people and talk with both spouses about my approach. But when we actually do start the process, usually a first meeting, I ask people to set aside about 2 hours of time. And it's a time for them to ask questions that they have, because I find that people have a lot of questions. But it's also a time for me to learn a little bit more about the family. If they're parents like your clients, I want to understand a little bit about how old their children are, what the children's schedule is like. Are they in school or daycare? Do they get themselves up in the morning? Are they, involved in extracurricular activities? Do they spend 2 weeks in the summer with grandparents or cousins? I want to understand a little bit about just the schedule of with children. I also want to understand if there are special issues. If a child has medical or learning issues that require additional attention or resources from the family. And then I want to get some history about, a little bit about how they have been caring for their children, but also how they hope to be caring in the future. I also want to know a little bit about how cash flow works. Where does the income come from? Does it, is there one account that everything gets paid for, or do we have separate accounts? We've always been separate. And also just to learn logistics, like who actually pays the bills in the family. Have you paid your taxes? I met with a couple last week, and they still haven't filed their 2015 taxes. Well, that raises another issue that I now need to be aware of. I also want to learn a little bit about their assets and their debts. Are there still student loans that people are managing and needing to pay off? Do they have a mortgage yet? Are there car loans? Has a family member helped them purchase their home? Trying to understand a little bit about their financial lives. I also want to understand, do they have health insurance? Is someone self-employed, and so therefore the other spouse's, employee health insurance is really important. I want to know if they have life insurance or disability insurance, some of the things that you think about when you are working with your clients. And then I want to understand a little bit about where they are in their thinking. Have they started to think about this, or is this all new and they don't even know what to think? So what level of support do I need? And generally in that first meeting, at the end of it, we're kind of planning the next step. So I think of an initial meeting as staging the mediation. Where do we need to focus on? What topic is the one that's keeping them up at night? Is it parenting? Sometimes couples haven't separated yet, and it's, how can we afford to live separately? Or, I want to see my kids, so I'm not really anxious to move out of the house, without knowing how I can, be with my children on a regular basis. Or sometimes it's cash flow, we have to make payments for after school care, and I don't know where that money is coming from. So let's have a conversation there. So I approach it that way. And another few questions that we're also thinking about is not only what topic, but therefore what homework, because mediation is it's an active process. Right. It's not like that I go back into my layer and figure out what the answer is. People need to share information about just their, document their income and their assets and their liabilities. And then I ask them to think about their expenses, which for a lot of families is a huge issue. and one of the more sobering things, because one household, they might be doing okay, but two makes it harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would imagine in going through the asset picture and what money is coming and going, there must be a lot of talk about, if not coordination with other outside professionals, whether it's life insurance agents or financial advisors or CPAs or estate planning attorneys.
Yeah, definitely, and also attorneys just in general. People often wonder, can I have an attorney if I'm in mediation? And the answer is yes. It's even encouraged. The attorney may not be at every session, because attorneys, family law attorneys really don't care whether you're with your children on Monday or Tuesday. But so there's some stuff that where the attorney really is very helpful, and there's some parts where the attorney will want to look it over. So we can use attorneys in a more economical way. And I also tell people that we're trying to give you information, and a lot of times, as you mentioned, some of these other professionals are really important about getting information. How much, can you afford your house? How much is it worth? You need realtors or appraisers to value that. Where people have a lot of choice, where they've been good savers, do I want more retirement assets or do I want more cash? Is it financially wise for me to stay in the house and exchange cash and retirement? So you can do that. And how does tax advisors are also very helpful. The way I think about it is it's how many bells and whistles. In an ideal world, you would have all the bells and whistles, but we're kind of weighing what's the most important stuff, and what a specific couple needs and what's helpful versus what information is kind of overkill, and I don't necessarily need a life insurance agent today. It may be that we delay that. Or one of the things we do talk about is every life cycle change is a time to update estate planning.
Yep.
And so I always, recommend, and I'm surprised about the number of people who don't have estate plans yet. And I always tell them, now's the time you would have to redo it anyway. So go. And so sometimes people will get divorced and then take a pause and deal with it after that as well.
In the conversation around what happens to the kids, visitation, who gets custody, or is it shared custody, does the idea or the conversation come up around, in the estate planning context, around guardianship? How, if we're doing estate planning going forward in a divorce situation or a split family situation, how do we go about naming guardians for the kids? Is that a conversation that
It depends on the family. I think I do mention that as an issue, because as you know in your work, it's not atypical that my sister's the guardian in both circumstances, but now that we're getting divorced, I may not really want your brother to be the guardian. So that is often a conversation. I think for a lot of parents, it's not so much who it is, but knowing that there is someone named. Because if one parent were to die before children become an adult, the other parent, even if they're divorced, is still the parent. So oftentimes it's not so much who is named, but that someone is named, and that particularly for young children, I think parents should care about 16 and 15-year-olds, and there are other host of issues to be dealt with. I think oftentimes with very young children it becomes more of an issue, or who would be an executor and deal with the money, or a trustee. And also people often want their we use life insurance in divorce as in marriage to backstop what happens if a parent is not around to either care for a child, and therefore we don't need to pay for a babysitter, or I'm paying support and now you're not there and I still need the cash. And people often want to name their children, their 5-year-old is the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. Well, that child can't receive that money. Right. And estate planning is really the best way to do that. And that's always a conversation and an issue that I'm bringing up with parents. And I will tell you, with older couples who have been, our children, grown children, it even becomes more of an issue oftentimes, where they had always thought the family home was going to go to their kids or their vacation home. And so therefore estate planning becomes even more
Right.
vital for different reasons.
Right.
No, no.
And I always find, and I always say to clients that around the guardianship issue, it's ideal if spouses can have a reasonable discussion about it and even come to some sort of agreement about who they would both want, if something were to happen to both of them, who they would want to serve as a guardian for the kids. But that even in the absence of that agreement, that a single parent has to go ahead and plan in any event.
Right.
And
right.
as I always say, plan as if your ex-spouse is going to predecease you, or will have no plan at all.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue, is that people, it's the last to die who gets to decide who the ultimate guardian is. But that becomes an important question, and again, it's more common that people want to make sure that that's in place. So it's not unusual for agreements to say something like, a year after we get divorced, we will each redo our estate plan so that there is a guardian that's named. It may not, in divorce, people don't often want, agreement, or, I want my sister, you want your brother, but at least they, have something there. But I think there are a lot, and when I work with families with children with special needs, that even becomes more so, depending on the, level of need and, anticipated independence of the child. For children who will have some sort of dependence later on in life, it becomes even more critical that people, together, because they will co-parent, and if a child will need a guardian as an adult, or at least someone to run money for them, or assistance with daily living kinds of things, those kinds of planning becomes more critical, as children age.
As it does in estate planning as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I often, and I will say with families with special needs, sometimes, because currently in Massachusetts, children get kicked off of all these services in their early 20s, and then you have to worry about Social Security and make sure that children are still eligible for the public benefits. There's a lot that they should be doing with their estate planning attorneys. It may not be that the moment is ripe, because families often are, though they ideally they would do their estate planning in contemplation of divorce or shortly after divorce. Some are feeling financially strapped, and so therefore they will sometimes, make it a requirement. They'll contract with each other, and that's what a divorce agreement is a contract.
Yeah. So somebody who's thinking about divorce, what's your advice, if you can give advice? Mediation, seek out a divorce attorney? How do you know what's the right thing?
That's an important issue. I would say get a lot of information. I think the more that you can talk with different providers. I will tell you that for couples that are likely to mediate, or where someone wants to mediate, you need to think long and hard about seeing an attorney first if you want to mediate. For some families, that's no problem. I get that you should see an attorney, and it's okay that you do. Other people feel like that's a betrayal. So where people are trying to have a cooperative process like mediation or collaborative law in their divorce, sometimes a spouse just interprets I'm going to get information from an attorney as you clearly don't want to be collaborative. And so they might get a reaction, which is now you are being sued for divorce and we're going to litigate. So I think there has to be, the more transparency that you and your spouse can have about even just talking about what's the process. I've mediated, how should we get divorced? I once had a couple who came in to figure out, should they mediate or should they litigate, and and sometimes and you can do that in couples counseling, you can do that in mediation. There are a whole bunch of parenting coaches and other things. The more cooperative parents can be, the better off in the long run, because even if parents are not going to be spouses, they are going to be co-parents forever, and the more that they can work well together. Doesn't mean you're my best friend anymore, but we are still in this business of child rearing together. Today I was at a training. I helped train mediators, new mediators, and this was part of the conversation. And one of the questions was to ask parents, what would you like your children to say about what the divorce experience was like? like when they are with, hanging out in the dorm with their other new college
Right.
classmates. What would you like them to say? And so I think the more that you can take care of yourselves and each other during this very difficult time, it really bodes well for people. So getting information, but doing it in a way where you're being as transparent as possible, I think is really helpful.
And quickly, some resources. How does someone find a good mediator? How does someone find a good divorce attorney?
Yeah, first of all, I think even, if you're in counseling, your counselor can be helpful. There is the Massachusetts Council of Family Mediation. That is the governing body for mediation in Massachusetts. There's also the Massachusetts Collaborative Law Council, which is also a source of attorneys. Many of them are very experienced. They a lot of them litigate. Often they mediate as well as work collaboratively with one another. And then my other favorite thing is to look at who's teaching classes at Mass Continuing Legal Education, mcle.org, because those are people that peers have said these are good lawyers as well. So those are some resources. So mcle.org, mcfm.org, and massclc.org. Those are the three places that I would probably start with as well. Yeah. And the other thing too is people should interview. Again, people choose professionals that they feel comfortable with, and it's okay to interview people. Some lawyers will charge for an initial meeting, a reduced rate, and others will talk for free, but that time is actually well spent.
All right, and in our last 30 seconds, I saw on your website today that you, in another time, you interned at Late Night for David Letterman.
I did intern for Late Night with David Letterman. It's been a very, as you can see, I didn't make my career in entertainment, but it's been very useful in being a lawyer. It's gotten me a lot of jobs.
Did you ever get to watch a Stupid Human Trick or a Stupid Pet Trick episode?
No, I didn't. I did get to play softball with David Letterman and the rest of the team a few times,
Awesome.
So that was probably the best takeaway.
Great,
Yeah.
Great. All right, well, thank you for joining me on this edition of The Dad Lawyer, and I'll hope you'll join us again next month when we have a new edition and a new guest. If you have any questions about today's discussion or about legal planning for your family, you can visit us on the web at parentsestate-planning.com, or you can call our Acton office directly at 978-263-6900. For additional articles and information about the legal and financial challenges facing parents of growing families, please visit thedadlawyer.com, also wickedsmartparents.com. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you again next time.